Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the fifth meeting in 2013 of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. Can I welcome all members and our witnesses? And I can remind everyone, please, to turn off all mobile phones and other electrical devices. Item 1 on our agenda is a continuation of our inquiry into underemployment. And I'd like to welcome, joining us this morning, Richard Cornish, who's Work Services Director for Scotland, and Ross James, who's Head of Labour Market Intervention Strategy from the Department of Work and Pensions. Thank you for coming along. Now, before we get into questions, is there something you'd like to say by way of a brief introduction? Thank you, Richard.
Very much, and thank you for inviting us to give evidence today. The memorandum we submitted before today will give you a baseline of the DWP position, and we hope that and the evidence we give today can set out our role and remit with regards to employment matters and explain how the welfare reform and universal credit in particular will aim to help reduce financial dependency and how we can impact on underemployment. The system will be fairer going forward and more efficient, and people will no longer need to be benefits experts, which perhaps they have done in the past. And so for those in work, financial support will be withdrawn at a single transparent rate as earnings increase to ensure that work always pays. We're also very happy today to talk about the current system and the current services operated by Job Centre Plus, and these are already becoming more flexible as we move towards universal credit. And just very briefly, I mean, the hard work that my team do in all of the job centres throughout the country here in Scotland doesn't often get reported, and whilst customer satisfaction rates are high, and we also recently achieved Customer Service Excellence accreditation, I'm not in any doubt that we can always improve the service, and there are sometimes, amongst the thousands of interventions that we carry out all the time, areas where we can improve the service, and universal credit is a key enabler to helping us make the system more simple and easier to navigate for everyone, staff and for claimants. So we welcome the opportunity to talk about this further with you today.
Thank you very much. I just remind members before we go into questions, there's an inquiry into underemployment, and I appreciate there'll be wider issues around welfare reform that will be relevant, but if we can try and focus on the fact that we're looking at underemployment without straying too much into broader issues, that would be helpful just in terms of focusing on the issues in hand. Can I maybe start off with a general question? One of the things that's come through the inquiry is that there has been a rise in underemployment as a result of the economic downturn. It's a phenomenon that's existed before that, but undoubtedly we've seen an increase. How has DWP and Job Centre Plus adapted to this change in the employment market and adapted to trying to assist people who are underemployed rather than maybe traditionally most of the focus was on the unemployed?
I mean, I'll start off and then perhaps Ross will want to come in. I think from the Job Centre Plus side, we've tried to become more flexible in what we can offer people. So in the past, a lot of our provision, a lot of our training, a lot of the interventions we can make have been limited to certain eligibility. So, whether it's people have been claiming for a certain period. And so whilst our primary role still was very much focused on those that are out of work, that will change under universal credit, and Ross will start to touch on that. But we are trying to kind of offer a more flexible range of options so that, we look at part-time work as an option, we look at self-employment as an option, and we try and kind of look across the whole labour market and tailor our services to kind of what's going on in the local labour market.
And in addition, things like the work programme, which I'm sure we may want to talk more about. The work programme is there to help get people into sustained deployment. So many of our providers are not just actually trying to put people into a job, but then actually there's a relationship with the claimant after they get into that job to make sure that it's the right thing, to make sure they have the confidence and skills to remain in that job and ideally to progress.
You touched on universal credit. Can you just explain briefly how universal credit, if it's introduced, is going to help people who are in an underemployed situation?
Try and keep it simple. We may go into more detail. At the moment, our claimant base stops on job seekers allowance who are working up to sort of around 16 hours a week. So beyond that, actually, there's a lot of people who are underemployed, but we don't touch. They're claiming tax credits. They sit outside of the DWP benefit regime, and so we don't have contact with them. Under universal credit, actually, universal credit will take over things like tax credits. So actually, our claimant base will increase to 11 million. 5 million of those claimants will be in work, and approximately 1.25 million of those will be working a little, so you could argue they're underemployed, and actually could work more. So the whole premise behind universal credit is actually, for the first time, we have an opportunity to intervene with those claimants who are working part-time but could do more to help build their confidence, to help build their skills, to increase the number of hours that they work, and to increase the earnings that they take home. I may want to come back to things like the taper and things like that later, but in essence, it's giving DWP for the first time an opportunity to work with those claimants. You may also ask what we will do, and I'll touch upon that later, because actually it's an untapped marketplace, so there's a lot of learning to be taking place there.
Okay, I'll bring in Chick Brody.
Hey, good morning, Mr. James, Mr. Cornish. How many DWP offices have been closed in Scotland in the last 2 years?
I don't have that figure right in front of me. We have in... Okay.
6 that I'm aware of. How are you going to cope with the increased workload that Mr. James says you'll have as a result of the implementation of universal credit?
I mean, I think as we get into the implementation of universal credit, then as we start to understand the volumes of people that are coming through on the front line, then we will be looking at the estate and seeing what we need.
That's too late. I mean, we're now having a programme coming in now. We have numbers, and I'll come back to numbers in a minute if I may, and you're not ready.
What I would just say on the any office closures, the ones that have been done certainly in the last year, that I am aware of those in quite a lot of detail. Those are sites where we haven't come out of a locality. So, for instance, in Aberdeen, we had 2 sites. One only had a certain bit of the process, and we had one main site in Chapel Street, and we've moved to having all of the customer load in one office because there was room in it. We've been able to open up back of house floors to customer floors. So in the main, where we have reduced the number of sites in the last year or 2, those haven't been coming out of localities.
Mr. Cornish is incorrect, because the one in John Street in Ayr was closed last year, the Disability Benefit Payment Centre, and people were expected to move to Kilmarnock. That is not the same locality.
I think there might be 2 different things we're looking at here. I think from benefit delivery centres, which don't offer a front of house, a face-to-face service, those have been reformed over the last few years, and we have changed some of those locations and moved some of that work around. But what we haven't done is pull out of job seeker face-to-face services in localities. So wherever we've changed some of our estates, we still maintain the same level of service in those localities. So there are a couple of probably separate issues in terms of the estate front job centres and then processing centres.
And just on a related point, in terms of being prepared, one of the real opportunities for universal credit is using technology to our advantage. So yes, the claimant base will change and there'll be new numbers, but actually the last thing we may want to do with many of those claimants is bring them into a Job Centre Plus office. What we need to do is use technology, use the internet, use those sort of systems available to us to actually have a much more informed conversation with an individual when they need it, and actually provide...
How many claimants do you think have the facility to communicate with you over the internet or directly?
I don't have the precise numbers, but I think from a job...
So how can you talk with confidence? How can you talk with confidence?
You cut them off mid-sentence.
Yeah, I do know that from so I can't quote the exact numbers, but within current job seekers, JSA claimants, job seekers agreement claimants, something like just under 80% have access to the internet, and something like 40% are doing transactional things like banking. For this new claimant base, tax credit claimants, the numbers are even higher. So something like 60% will be transacting over the internet. So actually, a majority of them have internet access, they have smartphone access, and are used to dealing with things in that way.
Just one last question on the numbers. In the submission that, thank you for providing that, it says evidence shows that there have all been workers who would like to work fewer hours, and you go on to explain that the opportunities, in inverted commas, that are there for people who might want to work more hours. But then your evidence is based, it says sample sizes are too small to allow more detailed analysis. I mean, you don't really know what the size of the issue is, do you?
Well, the numbers are based on the labour market survey, which is the only robust longitudinal source of data that there is. Unfortunately, that data source doesn't allow us to break down to an individual regional level in terms of understanding the problem. I would say the cost of trying to introduce some process that is granular enough to break down to a very regional, local level would probably outweigh the benefits. That's a subjective view, but that's my view.
Ms. Robertson?
Thank you, Convener. Perhaps go back to the connectivity aspect and the technology that's there. In certain areas of Scotland, we do have areas in some of our rural and remote communities that don't have access to the connectivity, and there's also related transport difficulties. And these are areas that we do know that quite often the people that are probably underemployed because of maybe just the difficulties of getting maybe from one locale to another. How flexible is the system to accommodate with that? Because, you know, I understand it's maybe not a one-size-fits-all, but with people in remote and rural areas, are they going to be penalised under the universal credit system if they can't get to work?
Start off. I mean, I suppose just to start on the rural question, I think in terms of the current system, then there are a number of steps in place to try and assist customers that are in rural areas. So we will pay for fares for them to come to extra interviews and such like, and the travel to work area that someone might need to. Someone will be in that is part of their eligibility for what jobs they should be looking for will take account of what physically they can get to in that locality. In terms of sort of as we move into the new system, there are options we can look at. We have a visiting service, so we can go and visit people, both with my own advisors in the job centres, but also a pan DWP visiting service that will go out, particularly to vulnerable customers, to visit them in their home across Scotland. It's a challenge, I think, for society in general as the labour market becomes more digital, you know, and some kind of surveys will suggest that, you know, 70–80% of jobs in some labour markets are purely filled through digital means, through internet vacancies and such like. We kind of have a responsibility to try and give as many of our claimants access to that digital environment through whether it's allowing them to use computers in our offices, and that's something we're looking to increase further still. So there's probably a number of factors. I don't think there's probably one kind of single solution, but Ross, if you want to...
If I may, in a universal credit world, you mentioned one size fits all. The current regime, which I'm sure you're familiar with, a claimant goes into a job centre and they sign a job seekers agreement, a JSAG we call it, which is fairly limited in terms of the scope and the personalisation it offers. Under universal credit, claimants will be asked to sign a claimant commitment, which is much more personalised on their individual circumstances, be it geography, be it caring responsibilities, be it the skills that they have. So it's actually much more tailored in a discussion with the Job Centre Plus advisor about what we would expect them to do and what the limitations may be. So, of course, an expectation would be that someone would travel a certain distance to be able to get into work, but actually that's based much more on that individual discussion rather than just a blanket, we will do that. So the claimant commitment is part of universal credit that allows for that tailoring and that personalisation.
You would take into account the facility and the factor is transport available? It's fine to travel into work, but if the facility isn't there, the infrastructure is not there to enable travel to work, is that individual then going to be penalised because the infrastructure isn't there?
I mean, I think one thing perhaps I could just add in the current system, which I'm sure will be the same in universal credit, is our advisors in job centres are really familiar. They're the local people living in the communities. They're very familiar with what is available transport-wise in that area. And I think the vast majority of my advisors will have on their desktop, on their computer, the link to the Travel for Scotland internet site, so they can look in detail at bus times, at various options for travel. So they will make sure that that's part of the agreement, the job seekers agreement that they make, and that will be the same in a claimant commitment.
In your submissions, you've stated it quite clearly that it pays to work and it should pay people to work. Would it not be the case in some areas, and again I'm probably focusing more on the remote and rural areas, where taking in the cost of transport, etc., that the time that that's taken into consideration and maybe the limited hours that they may be going to get because of the lack of hours within a locality, it's not going to pay them. And in fact, it's going to cost them. So therefore, they're going to actually be worse off.
I mean, I think the current system, there is the 16-hour rule that I'm sure you're familiar with, and that doesn't help people to move into more hours, or indeed sometimes it can catch them in that kind of scenario where, in some cases, it may be, they would need to be doing a lot of hours to make all of their expenses pay. I think the universal credit will change that, because they'll be keeping more money that they earn, and we won't get caught by the 16-hour rule.
I think my point is that the jobs have to be there to enable people to get into them in the first place. And in some areas, the jobs are clearly not going to be there. So, how do you circle that? I mean, it just seems to me that if the employment isn't there for people to up their hours or even get employment in the first instance, that they're perhaps going to be penalised.
I think they clearly we would want and love there to be more jobs available, but the system will respond to the local labour market. So if there aren't jobs in a locality, then
That's why we've got a system of underemployment, because in a lot of areas the jobs just aren't available. That's why people are working fewer hours, not because they want to work fewer hours, just because they can't get additional hours. Would that not be the case?
You've seen the data. It's absolutely the case for some people that they'd like to work more. I think, isn't it, that of the people who would, in part-time work, like to work more, nearly 3/4 of them would like to work more hours in that same job. But no, you're absolutely right. We all have a responsibility. The Scottish Government has a responsibility in terms of stimulating the employment side, the employers, to make sure that we can create the opportunities. I think our point is that what Job Centre Plus doesn't do is deliberately place a sanction on somebody who can't find work in an area where that work doesn't exist.
Okay. Brother Grant.
Following on from what you said about sanctions, what flexibility is available? I'm not sure if you looked at some of the evidence we'd received from Citizens Advice Scotland, where they were saying that they had case studies where people were underemployed, that because of the changes to tax credits, their income had fallen dramatically. Basically, they were just covering their costs of travelling to and from work. They weren't getting any tax credits. However, if they'd given up that job, they wouldn't have got benefits either. It seemed to me that someone was trapped in abject poverty because they weren't making an income at all, but there was nowhere that they could go to get help for this, or help to survive, other than food parcels from charities, which, that's not acceptable. What help is available to people in those situations, and what sanctions would they face if they were to give up that job?
Perhaps if I'll start off and then I'll bring Ross in. For the current system, I think it's worth saying that I think there's sometimes some reporting and coverage that a lot of people are being sanctioned, that this is kind of a core part of the regime. The number of people that are sanctioned, it depends on kind of when and where you're looking at, but it tends to be no more than about 10% of the live load of the register. Now, it's still, and what I would say, though, claimants are only ever referred to be sanctioned, or rather to be considered for their benefit to be reviewed by a decision maker who then might impose a sanction if they haven't fulfilled the conditions of their entitlement. So those conditions are set out very clearly for a job seeker when they come and claim benefit. They have what we call a new claims interview, which focuses on looking at what support we can provide, drawing up a job seeker's agreement, and then ensuring they have a very clear view of what is expected of them in return.
I'll you back slightly. This was someone who was underemployed, who wasn't claiming job seekers allowance, but didn't feel that they could give up that job and claim job seekers allowance because they were giving up a job. Albeit that job did not pay them, it basically covered their costs of travelling to and from, so they didn't have an income.
I understand you're right, so this person was claiming tax credits but not job seekers allowance.
Tax credits until the rules changed, and then they lost their tax credits because they weren't working 25 hours.
So I don't want to keep talking about universal credit as the answer to everything, but actually this is the big difference, because at the moment actually that claimant, that individual may not be in our system and isn't in another system. The whole point of universal credit is actually for that claimant, at the moment tax credits is through HMRC, and of course job seekers agreement is through DWP, two separate bodies. We're bringing all of that into one. So actually that claimant, as they move up and down the earnings threshold, will still be our customer, will still be able to work with them and support them. And importantly, let me just touch upon this now in terms of the making work pay area. At the moment, pretty much, so if you're on job seekers agreement, every pound that you earn, around 16 hours, we take £1 back. It's like for like. So actually, making work pay, is there an incentive to work a little bit more? Because actually every pound I earn is taken away. And for tax credits, it can be up to 91% of the income that you're getting from a salary is taken away from a benefits perspective. In universal credit, a taper is set at 35%. And there's other things that we can talk about in more detail later. But actually, it means that the more you work, up to a certain limit, you are going to be better off, because not only are you getting your salary, but we're only going to be taking away a percentage, a proportion of your earnings, of your benefit. So for every pound that you earn, 35 pence of the benefit that you'll keep. So at the moment, it's almost like for like. You earn something, we take it away. In universal credit, there's a taper that stops those cliff edges taking place, so that actually you earn more, you take home more.
It doesn't really answer the question I was asking. The question I was asking was where somebody is in a job where it doesn't pay, that's costing them as much to travel to and from work as they're earning, and they give up that job, what sanctions do they face?
Depend on the nature of why they left that job.
Because it doesn't pay, they can't survive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not denying that the case that was presented the other week exists, and I think there will be cases like that. I suppose the thing I would say is that we would never have mandated someone into a 4-hour job, with the threat of a sanction if they didn't, because we would only be looking to mandate someone that's a job seeker customer into a job that was over the 24 hours, if that was what they were looking for.
We've got a lot of people whose hours have been cut who are trapped in underemployment, not because they set out to be underemployed, but because their employers are cutting hours, trying to keep people on the books, cutting their hours. It comes to a point where they are not qualifying for any benefits, but their hours are not enough to sustain them in any way. It becomes, they are then in poverty. They don't have any choices, because if they give up work, they don't get any benefits because they face sanctions for voluntarily giving up work. Where is the answer for those people who are trapped in a horrendous situation?
I don't think this will be the answer you might want. I guess we would, if they were looking for Job Centre Plus support, there'll be lots of other support they might look for as well. But from the Job Centre Plus perspective, we would do everything we could to try and help them find work that would increase their hours, other jobs, maybe a combination. Lots of people in the labour market have several part-time jobs, so there might be options like that. But there would be other agencies that would kind of, perhaps look at this as well as Job Centre Plus.
There's no safety net for those kind of people.
I mean, for that precise example, we can take it away and have a look at and come back if we can find some more detail about that individual case. But on the face of it, we would look at providing support to find more hours in other jobs. But in the actual current benefit system, until universal credit comes in, then that case is as you present it.
Can I maybe ask you to follow up that point? How much discretion do your local staff and officers have if presented with a case in applying the rules? Or the situation that Rhoda Grant's pointed out, where somebody has been working a number of hours, these hours have been reduced, they realise that they can no longer afford to live, therefore they have to give up that job and present themselves as job seekers. I mean, how much discretion would a local DWP official have to look at that case and say a sanction should not apply?
I think it's quite difficult to answer in terms of, sort of the amount of discretion, because by the very nature, that wouldn't be so prescriptive. Both the advisors in the job centre and then the decision makers in the benefit centres that will make the decisions about any referral will look at all the evidence and all the factors, and there are certain kind of good cause scenarios. So, if someone left a job voluntarily, but there are other factors such as they were being bullied in the workplace or other scenarios, then there's discretion there. I think more broadly, there is a kind of a common sense discretion. So, I would expect my advisors to use their judgment, but at the same time, I wouldn't want there to be any kind of postcode lottery, for want of a better phrase, that would have people having different levels of discretion provided in different places. So therefore, that's why the system is in place, to ensure that there's a fair and consistent treatment of people across the board, using the guidance and rules that exist within the system. But I would, look at a common sense approach and to try and bring as much flexibility in each individual case. But it's quite difficult to pick out kind of generic circumstances where, there would be a set of scenarios where that would kind of occur.
Thank you. Alison Johnson.
Thanks very much. Obviously, for the first time, staff in Job Centre Plus are going to be working with people who already are in employment, and we're hearing about the challenges that brings, and obviously concerns around sanctions. Are staff being fully trained in how to deal with these new issues? Because some of it is simply down to logistics. If you're working set hours, you might be unavailable for interview and so on. So is enough investment being made in training?
Yeah, I'll start off, and Ross might want to come in. I mean, I think on the changes to kind of various policies, such as the sanctions and the conditionality and sanctions regime, then all staff had training, dedicated classroom training for that last year. One of my other accountabilities in my spare time is I'm actually leading the design of the training for the whole of the UK for staff for universal credit for people that work in job centres. So that's something that I expect to be very busy on over the next 6 months, and that's something we're still in very much the design phase for. But we are looking at quite a considerable amount of learning and development. Probably at least 1 week specifically on the broader changes to the system, to the kind of changes to the customer base, and then there'll be very specific kind of classroom training added onto that that's looking at the very sort of technicalities of the actual benefits. So absolutely, yeah. I mean, we have had training in place for what's been implemented so far, and we're developing, quite comprehensive training going forward.
Mayor, it's important to note, so I've talked about Job Centre Plus working with these in-work claimants, this 1.25 million. If your question were to be, well, what will the staff be doing to them? At the moment, we don't actually know fully. There are very few countries in the world that have worked with claimants who are underemployed in part-time work and trying to increase their hours, increase the amount of money they earn. There's some evidence worldwide about what may and may not work. It's limited. Our ministers actually launched a call for ideas a couple of weeks ago to actually start to bring in new and different ideas about how we may work with that claimant base. And we do value your input into that call for ideas. The way that DWP works, as I'm sure you know, we're very much evidence-based. We do pilot things. We make sure they work before we roll them out. In universal credit, we can't pilot some things until universal credit is in real state. And so the absolutely plan is that we will work out various different things that we could do with that in-work claimant base, make sure staff are absolutely well trained and have the skills to deal with that, and then we'll pilot them. And over time, that will give us the confidence that these sort of things work, be it technology or a face-to-face discussion or skills, these sort of things work less well, so that we can actually grow that regime over a period of time. But so, yes, the investment in staff is there now. Quite what they'll be doing for some of these in-work claimants, we don't yet know, because we have to get the evidence to know what works first.
And perhaps if I can just add, I sense one of the points perhaps you were alluding to was, would we be asking people that are in work to come into an office at a time that doesn't suit when they're working at the moment? And we absolutely wouldn't be doing that. And at the moment, we're trying to move to a much more flexible kind of, not a one-size-fits-all service. So we do a lot of outreach activity at the moment, for instance, all over the place. And, maybe that would be one of the options where we do more of that kind of activity, nearer kind of big, employers or such like. So I think there'll be a range of things we look to do, but it's still too early to kind of fine-tune that at the moment.
Follow-up, Convener, thank you. I suspect cases are going to arise that we simply won't have the means to address until we have some expertise in addressing them. This is new to everyone, so I'd hope there's a commitment to ongoing training, and a commitment that if someone was expected to attend an interview on a day that they already had employment in that other part-time work, that would be taken into account, and that no sanctions would be imposed in that sort of case. Is that a reasonable expectation? Okay. And can I just ask, is there any evidence that you're seeing more employers moving towards offering employment on a self-employed basis in order to avoid paying national insurance or other employee benefits like sick pay?
Anecdotally, I don't think I've picked up a huge amount of that. I think the thing that I have picked up in the last 12, 18 months is a move to more 0 hours contracts. And I think you'll be aware of that as well. And I think that's more anecdotal than evidential, but that is certainly something we have started to pick up. But I don't think we've seen a massive shift, not that we're aware, in the vacancies that come through to us particularly, that a particular move to self-employment.
Something you will keep statistics on: increase in 0 hours contracts, increase in recruitment agencies, self-employed positions.
I can't remember all the different sort of stats reports that exist, but I think there will be broadly a number of those reports you mentioned. Whether it's DWP statistics, it might be wider, governmental statistics from either government.
I think just for information, I think the figures we have are that 1 in 4 vacancies are now self-employed in job centres. That's the information we've been given. Okay, Mike McKenzie.
Thank you, Convener. I feel a bit sorry for you gentlemen in as much as, the latest economic figures were that the economy is contracting yet again, and yet you're obviously under pressure to increase employment. And I just wondered, are there any targets being imposed, either high-level targets or targets within your organisation for individual managers or staff to achieve? Are you driven by targets?
No, I think we've been on quite a journey in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, that we did. 2 or 3 years ago, we were probably an organisation that was driven by quite a lot of targets, and we were often driven by kind of activity targets. So we had quite a subset of different sort of activities. So we were sort of counting things a lot, and not maybe focused on outcomes. The thing that we've done in the last couple of years is move to a very kind of simple outcome regime. We still have some of the information underneath that we can monitor, but our primary kind of outcomes is to move people off benefit into work and to protect the payment system, to protect the integrity of the benefit system. So in terms of kind of individual outcomes, we have planning assumptions that we will move around 50% of people within 13 weeks into a job of claiming job seekers allowance. That tends to be what happens in the labour market, and a couple of measures like that. But they're our main measures. We don't have other measures or targets that you would refer to below that.
So you just apply that kind of 50% or whatever it is universally across the country? Is there a geographical variation to that?
Yeah, we've actually started, before the last 12 months, there was very much a kind of a UK-wide measure on that, and everyone would aim for the same kind of measure. This year, we've brought in differential targets, and we're just testing that out still, but we're trying to take account of local labour markets. So in some areas, it might be even down to kind of local offices will have a slightly different target within that range, dependent on their local labour market. So we have started to try and build some of that local picture into the targets as well.
Do any of your employees feel under any pressure to achieve the targets that are set for them?
I think in terms of getting people a job, that's our primary role. So I would always give that as a major priority. I hope people wouldn't feel under pressure, but in any organisation where you're there to achieve an outcome, then you know, that the discussion that you have every day as part of your role is going to be about, you know, well, how many more people can we get a job today? That's the kind of conversation that will go in on a local job centre.
And in terms then of maybe fulfilling those targets that are set for them, and perhaps if they feel under pressure, what kind of tools are available? I mean, there has been some talk of sanctions. Is that one of the tools that some of your local managers might use to achieve a target?
No.
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 What kind?
So I think, well, there's a range of products, guidance, tools. You know, for instance, in a local office, we might try and increase the amount of, you know, voluntary work experience people could do, or we might try and increase the types of training courses we've got in place, the types of provision that people could go on, or we might talk to employers about trying to run sector-based work academies with, you know, guaranteed interviews at the end of it. So there's a whole range of different kind of products and initiatives we can kind of throw into that kind of pot. The sanctions regime is the regime that the benefit kind of system operates under, but I don't think that people would target the sanction regime specifically to get the outcome. You know, it would depend on individual circumstances.
You don't think?
Well, no, they would not. I mean, you know, not with any direction from me. So no, I haven't seen any evidence of that.
You mentioned earlier on, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you mentioned that you use sanctions in about 10% of cases.
Yeah, it's roughly about 10%, and that might be that several individuals have received several sanctions, so it may not be 10% of the entire live load, as it were. So that, and we don't have that kind of granularity of data down to any local level.
That seems a very, very big proportion. Do you not have concerns that this is a system that's just not working when you're obliged to use sanctions to that extent?
I think that we continually try and ensure that claimants understand their responsibilities from the outset of the claim. So I don't see any kind of rise in the claimant sanctions as a measure of success in any regard. You know, longer term, and as we get into universal credit, then you know, I think we would like to see less people getting sanctions because they are fulfilling their obligations within the benefit regime. So it's not something we drive, the sanctions regime. It's part of the system, and people are only referred for a sanction when they haven't fulfilled their part of the obligations of that, receiving that benefit.
Just one further question, Karina. You know, you mentioned this, you know, concern about postcode lottery or so on, or sanctions being applied in different ways, and that we've heard that there's a degree of discretion in how they're applied. But do you, as an organisation, have any kind of system of checks and balances to make sure that these sanctions are being applied, you know, reasonably and fairly when they are applied? And then, just related to that, if an individual finds himself the recipient of sanctions, is there any mechanism, if he feels or she feels that they're being applied unfairly, is there any mechanism for the individual to challenge that? So, you know, it's kind of related there.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps if I'll start with the second one, yes is the answer to that question, that people can appeal. They can ask initially for a reconsideration, where the decision maker, normally a different decision maker, will look again at that case, and if they are still not satisfied with the outcome after that, then they can make an appeal. So on the first point, the checks and balances, there are a number of checks and balances within the benefit processing regime. So decision makers will have a kind of a sample of their decisions looked at by their managers to be quality checked, as would people in the job centres. So personal advisors will have regular, what we call quality assurance frameworks, where their manager will sit in on interviews and sit in on the work that they're doing to look at the quality of that and ensure that it, you know, is reaching a consistent standard.
We have heard evidence of, you know, quite a lot of criticism of the way the system operates, you know, and that would suggest to us that maybe the system of checking fairness and so on is perhaps could do with improvement. What would you say to that?
I think if we found, if we were presented with evidence suggesting that, well, then we'd look again at it and have a look to see whether we need to review any of our systems. I haven't been presented with any evidence yet that would suggest that, but if we did receive evidence, then we would look again at the systems. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Margaret McDougall.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, gentlemen. Earlier on, you said that you would be looking at ways of helping the underemployed into full-time employment, and yet when you were questioned by Alison Johnson, you said you didn't actually know how you would do that yet, if I understood you correctly, and yet this new regime is due to start in April of this year. So it is quite a concern that you don't have those systems in place yet. For example, someone's underemployed, they may be offered a training course, I would imagine. How will that work then if that person is on irregular hours where they're on a zero contract and they may have to work 10 hours one week and maybe 16 another, and yet there's this training course that they must go to improve their employment possibilities?
The second, if I may. So not to mislead, people who are on job seekers agreement, so working up to 16 hours, there's a lot that we already do with them to help build their skills, their confidence in work, to give them the opportunity to work more hours. And Richard can come back to that in a moment. The issue with universal credit is, or the opportunity with universal credit is, it is this claimant base that we have never touched before. So I appreciate it may be a concern that we don't know the answer, but as I said earlier, the reality is the evidence isn't there about what may work or what may not work. So one can see it as an opportunity that as universal credit rolls out, and it will roll out till 2017, we can try new things, we can learn, and we can improve, which is exactly what we will be doing from a universal credit perspective.
And just to say, I mean, I think from the Pathfinder that's starting in April, which is just a very small number of claimants in the Manchester area, that is deliberately small scale, so we can learn from that, and that's only going to be increased as we learn and increase the rollout over the next kind of couple of years. So we're not into the territory of kind of the mass rollout of universal credit for some time yet. So we'll be able to learn from the lessons of the Pathfinder initially.
Obviously, it causes a great deal of stress to the individuals who are underemployed and are looking for full employment, and it seems to me that this adds to their stress because there's that uncertainty continually all the time, and of course the threat of sanctions is there as well. My other question is on women and the high numbers of women who are underemployed. Have you got any discussions that are ongoing as to how you help women into full employment, and given the childcare concerns that they have, and what exactly do you do to work with women to help them into full employment?
I'll start that off. I mean, in terms of childcare, that's a kind of not our primary accountability in terms of its provision supplied by Scottish Government, local authorities and others. So we do talk to Scottish Government in particular about, as the reforms move on, what else is there from a childcare point of view that can be put in place. I think our main interaction has been, for example, with lone parents. So as reforms have been going on for some years now with lone parents, the majority of those lone parents have been looking for part-time work to fit in with caring responsibility. So my lone parent advisors have become quite experienced in kind of trying to fit around what options are available locally for childcare, trying to kind of look for vacancies that would match both the childcare and all the caring responsibilities. So we do look to kind of work around what's available in the local labour market and target some of those vacancies to people that would need them as part of their caring responsibilities.
Similarly, if you're offering them a training course, they would consider the flexibility available.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, at the moment, we will pay people's childcare if we send them on a training course. So we have a number of kind of support measures we can put in place, and I'm very sure we would look at those options in universal credit as well.
Okay, we have a little time in hand. I've got 3 members who've indicated they want to come in with supplementaries. Firstly, Chick Brody.
I don't want to dwell again on preparedness, but I think you've answered the fact that you're not prepared because you've just said evidence may or may not be there as to what works. So we're actually, as far as you're concerned, you're going to learn on the job. But let me ask.
Well, I think it's only fair to let Mr. James answer that point.
Thank you very much. If I were to come to you now and say, we know exactly what we're doing X, Y, and Z, and you'd say to me, well, where's the evidence? And I would say, oh, we haven't got any yet, because actually, as I keep saying, we have not worked with this claimant base. We haven't had the opportunity to try and increase employment with this tax credit claimant. At the moment, a tax credit claimant claims tax credit, and there's nothing that they need to do as a result of it. So the reverse is true. If I were to sit here and say, yeah, we've got it all cracked, you would say, well, no, you haven't, because there's no evidence. I really do think, therefore, from a universal credit, to take a view that we need to try things, we need to learn, we need to demonstrate what works, and we need to evolve that and roll it out over time, is actually very positive, rather than introduce a whole new benefit system through universal credit, where we think we've got the answer, and we find out that things don't quite work.
But I'm more interested in the customer than the supplier.
I'm just going to add, one of the things we're trying to do over the next year, and will continue to do, is pilot things. So in Scotland, we've got 3 local authority pilots that are looking at the range of support around what individuals will need for helping them navigate through the universal credit system. The Scottish Government are also running 3 pilots in local authority areas here as well. So it is very much, we don't have all the answers for this, but as Ross would suggest, and I think others in Scottish Government local authorities would agree, none of us have all the answers yet, and that's why we're trying to pilot things to learn from that as we go along.
A terrible indictment that we're talking about this reform being weeks away, and we are not ready. I mean, the pilots and all of this, there should have been testing done before. Let's not dwell on that, because I think I've taken up too much time of your time, and thank you for the answers. I wonder if I may ask about your relationship with all of the training agencies that we have in Scotland, and how much you actually, or how much is actually spent, for example, with A4E in terms of the work programme. Can you give us some guidance as to how you work with these, and also the those that are underemployed that are looking for training? Yeah. And how much is actually spent with the likes of A4E?
Yeah, I don't have a specific answer to A4E. They're one of a number of different suppliers that aren't directly contracted with the department. So they are a subcontractor to Working Links, one of the prime providers for work programmes. So, but clearly they're in the system, as a number of other providers are. So my primary interaction for work programme is with Ingeus and Working Links, the 2 prime contract providers for Scotland. We have a number of other providers that I meet regularly, the likes of Working Links and other major providers here. And in fact, we're having an event in a few weeks where we're getting all of the providers together to kind of talk about the new system and to kind of share good practice. So just on one point specifically, I think what we are seeing is some learning experience already happening from the work programme, and Ross may want to come in a bit more generally on the work programme if you want to talk about that. But for instance, I visited Working Links a few weeks ago in Glasgow, and it's quite interesting to see the in-work support that they're providing people, because the work programme contract, the way that's set up, means that they need to ensure people stay in work and remain there, and give them the support, because that's how they can claim outcome payments. So there is some kind of interesting work emerging, and I think as we get further into universal credit, some learning that we'll be able to use already from from the work programme contracts, and it might be something we can provide further information on if you'd like it.
And these outcomes are all audited and measured and are bona fide?
Yes.
Thank you.
Really grand.
Can I just go back to childcare? Do you take into account the cost of childcare in the universal credit? So if someone was to get work, is the cost of paying for childcare factored into, the sliding scale that you were talking about earlier?
Yes, it is. The exact detail, I'm afraid, I don't have top of mind, but we can confirm to you separately. But yes.
Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. You mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the remote and rural areas, there's a lot of flexibility for vulnerable groups. One aspect is, I'll probably get you to define the vulnerable group in a second, but with people with, say, disabilities who are underemployed due to the nature maybe of the work, the work isn't there, maybe productivity's gone down, and rather than make the person unemployed, the employer's quite content to keep the person on with reduced hours. The person maybe with the disabilities may not have the flexibility of other people to go out and find alternative part-time work to increase their hours, how would you deal with that?
I mean, that's quite a sort of hypothetical scenario, but I suppose the...
Scenario, to be honest.
I mean, what we do, we have disability employment advisors in all our job centres, and they work really closely with local employers. So they're responsible for kind of assessing the disability symbol that employers can obtain. So I think we do, and we will continue to look at our relationships with local employers and talking to individual local employers who, I think, over a number of years now, we've started to see a lot more employers becoming, not only because of legislation but also because of society in general, a lot more flexible in terms of offering, not just for disabled people but for people with caring responsibilities and other issues as well. So I think we are seeing that shift in the labour market where employers are becoming more flexible, and it's something we would certainly, on an individual basis, try and work with on a local basis through our disability employment advisors.
We would accept that people with disabilities are going to find it much more difficult to have the opportunities that maybe that was other people have, but again, they're probably not there for many people either. So therefore, they're going to be disadvantaged. And if they're underemployed, I'm just wondering the impact. And again, maybe this is maybe touching on some of the welfare reform, maybe which you don't want to go into, is going to disadvantage that specific group.
The only thing I'd say, unless Ross wants to come in, is not every disability will be the same, and every individual will be able to respond differently. So I wouldn't want to kind of give a sort of badge to everyone in that sense that they will all fall into a certain kind of category or a certain set of circumstances. So I think all I can say is we would look at each individual circumstance. Some maybe could more easier work in different jobs or increase their hours, and we try and support everyone that needs it.
DWP continue to utilise access to work. Will that remain?
As far as I know,
yeah. Mr. James wants to come in there.
Forgive me. All I want to say, I would agree with you that we know that disability employment has increased, but it's still way out of proportion with regards to other people. We now put people on employment and support allowance onto the work programme, which is 2 years sustained support to help them get into work. It's early days in terms of the figures, but it's additional support that we're going to give disabled people. Many of the issues are complex. Mental health is very, very complex. So we need to focus more on that, but there is a concerted attempt to do so. And things like the work programme are focusing on it.
Actions will be taken so that people aren't maybe applying sanctions because, all these factors have got to be taken into consideration. And although we're sort of saying try and see and work out where we're going to go once we've implemented, cognizance is going to be taken in, and people with disabilities perhaps are going to not be sanctioned in the same way. Was that you're suggesting? Maybe there's scales and flexibility?
I wasn't suggesting that quite what the regime could be or should be under universal credit. I don't have the answer, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Margaret McDougall.
On graduates, what special support do you give to graduates who are unemployed or underemployed?
I think in terms of our primary accountability, which is supporting those that are searching for work, we've done quite a few different things. We do graduate job fairs, we've done enterprise clubs. We also use Flexible Support Fund to offer any training or support that's relevant to the individual. So what I would say is we don't have a set system where we put all graduates through a certain kind of sheep dip approach. We try and look at everyone's requirements across the board, whether they're graduates or not, and then tailor the support to the individual. So, but yeah, we don't kind of have a set graduate scheme. We will look at across the board what's available and tailor it to the individual.
What interaction do you have with universities to ensure that we have this match with the availability of jobs and the graduates that are being produced?
We don't have a huge amount of direct discussions with universities. We have a lot of close relationships locally with colleges, but with universities we tend to discuss a lot of the kind of the skills pipeline through Skills Development Scotland. So we have a very close relationship with Skills Development Scotland, who would be kind of primarily looking at the skills pipeline, and then we will be looking at how their programmes offer the right support. Are there any gaps that we need to look at as well? How do we kind of make sure there's no duplication or overlap between the different offers available.
Right, okay, I think that's been quite a comprehensive session. Thanks to all members for the questions. Thank you, Mr James, Mr Cornish, for coming along and for your assistance to the committee. I think we've got one more evidence session due with the Cabinet Secretary, and then we'll be reporting in due course. So you will read with interest our comments in due course, but I'm grateful to you on behalf of the committee for giving up your time and coming along. And at this point, I think we'll have a short suspension to allow a changeover. If we can reconvene, just remind members we are in public session. Now, item 2 on the agenda is the question of responses received to our report on renewable energy targets in Scotland. Members will have received quite a comprehensive package of responses from different organisations, starting with the Scottish Government and so on. Now, I'll just remind members we do have a debate in the Chamber on the committee report on the 21st of February, when there will be an opportunity to raise issues and obviously any points in these responses that members wish to. Beyond that, are there any specific issues members wish to raise in relation to these responses here? Or are we happy just to leave it, raise them in the debate?
Debate's fine.
People happy to raise them in the debate? Okay. Thank you very much. And at that point, we go into private session. So thank you.